Welcome back. We're talking about the ongoing tension among Israel, Iran, and the Palestinians. Joining us now from New York is Abdelhamid Siyam. He's a former spokesman for the United Nations and a professor of Middle Eastern Studies at Rutgers University. And with us from Boston is Kaveh Afrasiabi. He's an author and former advisor to the Iranian nuclear negotiating team. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Kaveh, let me start with you, and let me start with the latest news that we're hearing about this ruling by the International Court of Justice. It's an interim ruling which says that the U.S. should ease sanctions that it reimposed on Iran when it pulled out of the nuclear deal. These sanctions referred to humanitarian goods and civil aviation. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, on a personal level, I'm very happy to hear that. This is a good initial victory for Iran in a long, arduous legal battle, and a huge setback for both the United States as well as Israel, which has been manipulating the U.S. government through its army of lobbying groups to wage an illegal economic warfare against Iran. This while the Israeli government itself is a nuclear pariah state possessing maybe a couple of hundred nuclear warheads without bothering to even join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, or allowing the slightest inspection of its nuclear facilities to outside inspectors, in sharp contrast to Iran, that has subjected itself to the most rigorous inspections in the history of the IAEA, right, per the admission of the IAEA Director General, who today or yesterday soundly rebuffed Prime Minister Netanyahu's latest accusations against Iran. So this ruling, in my opinion, is a landmark ruling that benefits Iran and the international community that is facing this unlawful, chaotic Trump administration and its effort to upend the international order.
Okay, Kaveh, I want to get to those inspections that you talked about, and let's talk about what the Israeli Prime Minister had to tell the United Nations. He said that Israel has information that Iran has a secret atomic warehouse with nuclear weapons, and as you heard in that interview we did with Benjamin Netanyahu's spokesman, that is a violation of the Iran nuclear deal. So why doesn't Iran allow these inspections to take place to disprove these allegations being made by the Israelis?
Well, first of all, we have a very rigorous inspection mechanism in place that has been authorized by the United Nations Security Council to monitor very closely through short notice inspections and others with the help of additional protocol, resulting in thousands of visits by the IAEA inspectors of various Iranian facilities. And yet, the Israeli Prime Minister, who since the early 1990s has been making these wild allegations against Iran, resorts to this tired discourse, continuously accusing Iran, and the director of the IAEA made it very clear that they're not going to accept these allegations at face value. They have their own set parameters that they follow, and it was a very polite rejection of the Israeli allegation. And let me add that a Euronews reporter has gone to that site, found it to be completely non-conspicuous and benign, and the international media can go and visit there as well and soundly refute Netanyahu's latest theatrics. So I really think that the world has heard enough of Mr. Netanyahu, and he needs to find, new games with the international community.
All right, let me bring in Abdelhamid and talk about the ongoing conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Abdelhamid, we heard conflicting messages from the Israelis and the United States on a potential two-state solution. President Trump says he favors such a solution, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has a different idea. This is what he had to say. Let's watch.
I've discovered that if you use labels, you're not going to get very far, because different people mean different things when they say states. What I'd like to see is that the Palestinians will have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten us. And what that means is that in the tiny area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. It's all about 50 kilometers wide. That's where the Palestinians live and the Israelis live. In that area, under any peace agreement or without a peace agreement, Israel has to have the dominant power, military power, overriding. Otherwise, that place will be taken over by Islamist terrorists, either Daesh, ISIS, or Hamas, or Iran, or all of the above. And that's my condition. Now, people say, was that commensurate with the state? I don't know, you decide.
So, Abdelhamid, you hear what the Israeli Prime Minister says there. Is that going to be acceptable to the Palestinians?
No, it's not. This is a non-starter. The Palestinians accepted the idea of a sovereign, contiguous, viable Palestinian state on the 4th of June 1967 border with East Jerusalem as its capital, and the dismantling of all the settlement, because they are all illegal. There is no exception about that, and the right of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes. These are the minimum that all Palestinians with all their factions, including Hamas, have agreed together that this is their project for the time being, which Mr. Mahmoud Abbas repeated that in the General Assembly in his speech. So to come for Israel or the United States to say Jerusalem is off the table, the right of return off the table, the security is in the hands of Israel, the Jordan Valley is in the hands of Israel, settlement will remain where they are. Jews have the right to settle anywhere in the West Bank, and you say, and you call it a state? This is the biggest bluff that any statesman can say in front of the international community and the GA.
Okay, that's the Palestinian point of view, Abdelhamid. But I just want to point to something that the Israeli spokesman told us in that earlier interview. He said that there were similar arrangements that the United States had with Germany and with Japan after World War II. Was that a valid comparison?
No, it's not. I mean, there is completely, the comparison does not work here. I mean, Palestinians are indigenous people. They live in their own homes and land for thousands of years. They didn't come from anywhere. They were not defeated in a war with Israel. They were occupied. The United Nations was very clear on defining that these areas are occupied territories. They asked Israel to withdraw. Resolution 242 is very clear. The Fourth Geneva Convention is very clear on that. They have no right to settle their citizens in occupied land. So international law is on the side of the Palestinian. So why we have to go to compare between a country like Japan, when it was completely occupied, and the US even wrote their constitution, and Germany, which had occupied all of Europe, and it was an aggressor in that World War II, and you compare it to the Palestinians who've been subject to all these suffering through us last 70 years or more. So the Palestinians have accepted what is called the minimum solution. I mean, they used to believe in all the Palestine as their right, as the PLO original charter says. But after 1967 and after the many, mediations and that, the Palestinians settled to what is called a state in the occupied territories. So I don't think you will find one Palestinian who will accept less than that minimum of a real sovereign Palestinian state in the occupied land that occurred in 1967.
Okay, Kaveh, getting back to Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations, he accused European signatories to the Iran nuclear deal of appeasing Iran by sticking with that deal, which is also known as the JCPOA, or the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The United States, of course, has pulled out of the deal, and this is what President Trump had to say at the UN about it. Let's watch.
Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction. They do not respect their neighbors or borders or the sovereign rights of nations. Instead, Iran's leaders plunder the nation's resources to enrich themselves and to spread mayhem across the Middle East and far beyond. We cannot allow the world's leading sponsor of terrorism to possess the planet's most dangerous weapons.
So, Kaveh, do you think there will be pressure from the United States, and that pressure will be so great that it will force probably the other signatories to the deal to pull out as well?
I don't think so, and we are seeing very determined efforts by the other signatories, the Europeans in particular, to come up with imaginative financial mechanisms in order to safeguard and preserve the Iran nuclear deal, which is in the interest of the international community and is widely regarded as a net non-proliferation plus. So the US and Israel find themselves isolated. All their efforts to sabotage the JCPOA have failed, and we saw a united front at the Security Council just last week when President Trump found himself isolated on Iran, and all the other parties, the permanent members, voicing in support of the JCPOA, including China and Russia. And this trend will continue regardless of the vilification of Iran by Israel, which we just heard from their spokesperson. And of course, they need to look in the mirror and see themselves and the havoc that they're wreaking in the Middle East by systematically trying to weaken the state system in the Middle East, by perpetrating regular violence against the Palestinians, by continuously violating the airspace and sovereignty of their neighbors, Lebanon and Syria, and having total disregard for international law, international humanitarian law, and of course, above all, being completely oblivious to the international community's effort to put Israel's clandestine nuclear program under scrutiny and inspection by the IAEA and so on. So what you have is a prime rogue state in the Middle East that all the adjectives that President Trump used for Iran actually apply to Israel in full force. And Mr. Trump has a misplaced criticism, in my opinion, because Iran has not invaded any of its neighbors for the past 300-400 years, and has been a force of stability that's helped crushing the ISIS. And you have not had one single case of ISIS attack on Israel, and that raises the question of why. Because Israel has been harboring the Islamist radicals and so forth by their own admission. So all these hypocritical statements by Israel belie the facts.
Abdelhamid, Israel continues to seize Palestinian land and continues to build on occupied territory, build these settlements. I mean, we listened to what the Israeli spokesman had to say there, and there's a very fundamental difference between the Palestinians and the Israelis, well, actually between the Israelis and the rest of the world on the status of the land. The West Bank and Gaza are seen as occupied territories. Israel sees it as Israeli territory. But looking at the possibility of a two-state solution, do you think it's still viable with all the Israeli settlements now being built?
No. Honestly, I don't believe that the possibility of the two-state solution still exists. It has been completely scrapped when Israel continued with these settlement activities. There was not one single Israeli prime minister who believed in the two-state solution. There was not single Israeli prime minister who stopped the expansionist policy of settling in the occupied Palestinian territory. They keep talking about it, but on the ground, completely they're doing the opposite. There have been some resentment in the international community, but they feel now empowered by an administration in the White House that they are behind them, as Trump said, 100%. So why they have to stop now? If the Trump administration supported all the Israeli demands by expelling, taking off the issue of Jerusalem off the table, and the settlement becoming legal. And they don't even use the word occupied territories now. And the right of return has been also scrapped. So the Israeli now feel empowered. They feel now it's their time to expand on the settlement and to completely scrap this idea of the two-state solution. They talk about it, but on ground, there is no chance to see a Palestinian, independent Palestinian viable contiguous state in the occupied territories.
Okay, Abdelhamid Siyam, Kaveh Afrasiabi, thanks to both of you for joining us.